My name is Vivian King, and thank you for watching Truth and Justice with Vivian King. Our topic is real interesting tonight. We're going to be discussing police cavity searches, and that's where a person is suspected of being a drug dealer or selling drugs, and the police actually go inside a person's body to look for the drugs. I have two guests in the studio with me tonight. One is Clarence Walker. He's a journalist and court watcher. He is a concerned citizen that goes to any of the 37 courts and some of the federal courts, and he actually watches trials. I also have in the studio Kevin Howard, who's an expert at criminal law and who has appealed a case, tried and appealed a case of first impression is what we call it, where the Court of Appeals has looked at this issue for the first time, the legality of going up somebody's rectum or looking inside someone's vagina to look for actual drugs. This happens a lot in the minority community. It's illegal. As you know, we have the Fourth Amendment, which protects citizens against illegal searches and seizures. And if a police officer goes inside the cavity of a person's body, that is a search and a seizure for constitutional purposes. Many times the police officers lie about it. They don't tell the truth. They don't say that they've actually done it because it's illegal. But it happens all the time on the street. So we want young people to be educated about this and also to understand what their rights are. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Clarence Walker. He's watched several trials, and I want to just throw the issue out there by him telling some fact patterns of what he's seen in the trial. First of all, we'll go over a trial that a local famous attorney named Wendy Akins tried. Clarence, go ahead and talk to us. You can either talk to me or talk to the audience.
At the time, I basically was at the courthouse on my courthouse beat, and I was there was a slow day, so I saw attorney Wendy Akins trying a drug case, and you know she has a good reputation of representing her clients passionately, and so I decided to watch the trial. It was a drug case. It was a case where police from the Northeast Tactical Response Team Unit executed a warrant upon a house where there was other people in the house, and the person that she was representing was one of the people that was charged along with others for cocaine possession. And so as the trial proceeded, the officers testified, you know, as to how they go through the police procedures of getting a warrant and going to the location and, you know, and checking things out and going in and secure the house and make arrests. So by this time, she put on her case. Attorney Wendy Akins put on her case, and she had her defendant, her client, to come in and testify. And so when he got on the witness stand, well, she went through the regular Q&A answer, who you are, you know, how old are you, and how did you happen to be at this house on this particular time. And he went through, you know, why he was there and what was going on, how the police treat everybody when they busted into the house and calling everybody bad slurs, racial slurs, and, you know, he said he was just frightened. So she also asked him, she said, did the police search you? He said, yes, they did search me. Okay. She said, he searched you all over your body. He said, yes, they did. Yes, they did. She said, but wasn't there an unusual search that happened, you know, at the time that you was arrested? He said, yes, it did. And she said, can you tell me what happened? Can you tell me what this search, I mean, what did this officer do, you know, in terms of searching you? What did he do? You know, what part of your body did he search? He hesitated, his words became, you know, haltingly like, and and he started to swallow hard, and he started crying. And he say he put his finger into my rectum, and the jury was blinking and was like, how could this be? Why would he do this? And she said, how did it feel to have a police officer to be putting his finger inside your rectum? He said, I felt like I was being raped. I felt less than a man. He said it was, it was just so, he said, he said it was just so horrible, and he just continued to cry. She said, which one of the officers who put his finger in your rectum? He said, the tall officer, reddish face, and he got patches of hair missing out of his head. And he had testified previously, okay? But anyway, when they actually had him to come back in, and he testified again, and he denied putting his finger in the defendant's rectum. And so as I listened to this, I didn't know whether or not if that was legal or not. I didn't know at the time. But as I listened to this man tell this horror story of a police officer putting his finger inside his rectum and probing inside his rectum, it was just awful. I even felt dehumanized myself as a man, and I was not the person who had actually experienced it in real life. Because I know that if this could happen to him, it could happen to me. Furthermore, the officers who executed the warrant on that house, I was very familiar with their tactics. I was very familiar with the investigation that the DA's office was doing at the time on the Northeast Tactical Response Team for searching people illegally. They allegedly searched one woman and made her pull down her clothes. They beat up some people. They had complaints of, of putting drugs on people. And this was a pretty tough unit. And at the time, ADA, Assistant District Attorney Jim Lindeman, was conducting this investigation of this same police unit that this police officer was with, who put his finger in the defendant's rectum.
And let me say what I think is significant about that, Clarence, is that the police, the man who was violated in that way was not the target of the investigation. It wasn't his home. In fact, he was almost homeless, because I spoke with attorney Wendy Akins, and she said she had to actually go buy him some clothes at the Star of Hope for the trial. He was basically pretty homeless, and it was a court-appointed case. The good news is that he was acquitted. He was found not guilty, because the drugs in the house were not in his rectum anyway. They were in the house,
Right.
a house where he was visiting. So at least he was vindicated in that regard. And she told me that the guy was so humble and so appreciative that he sent her Christmas cards for many, many years, because I think this happened in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it was around about 92 or 93. It was early 90s. Right.
So it was a very long time ago. But we want to talk about what we call cavity searches, is what we're talking about today, when they go into a cavity or crevice in your body. Was there a second case that you wanted to share with the viewers?
Yes, there is a second case, whereas a lawyer friend of mine who related to me a case involving a young man who complained to her that he was going home, that's in the Heron Clark area. He was going home, and the police pulled him over. And I assume at the time, there was maybe some drug trafficking out there. You know how the police, they don't use the word racial profiling. They say criminal profiling, okay? So they stopped this young man, and without probable cause, okay, and asked him to search his car, and he let them search the car, and they told him that we need to search you, and it had this young man to put his hands on the car, and they searched him, okay, And then they told him that, you know, we're going to see if you got any drugs in your butt, because some people, you put drugs in their butt. He said the officer got one glove and put his glove on and put his finger, his gloved finger, into his rectum.
Wow.
There was no drugs found. The officer let him go. He had the opportunity to write any tickets, but he didn't. If I'm not mistaken, this young man also had a warrant or two, tickets, that is, and they just let him go.
Did the young man make a complaint with IAD?
I don't think he did. I mean, based on my conversation with the attorney who related the story to me.
Okay. Well, next in the studio we have attorney Kevin Howard, and he's been practicing for many, many years, and he wants to tell us about a case that he tried, and he appealed, and the Court of Appeals said it was a case of first impression. So let's turn it over to Kevin Howard. Tell us about your case, Kevin.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you for having me, and I know you've been a truth fighter for many, many years, and I'm sure the community appreciates that. I'm going to tell you about a case. This case actually occurred, the actual date of this particular search was December 20th, 1997. And this happened here in Houston, Texas. And the way this case developed was as follows. Two Houston police officers said that they had received information from a concerned citizen. And legally that has some significance we'll get into later, but they received information from a concerned citizen that there were 3 men in a particular area in Houston, and that these 3 young men were selling crack cocaine. And the testimony of the officer did not indicate how the officer received the information, where he received it, whether it was by phone, text, fax, or whatever. He just said he received the information. That's also legally significant. And neither did the officer say in what manner that the person who received the information had received it. In other words, he didn't say that the person had personally observed these young men selling crack cocaine before, or any of that information. The concerned citizen also said, he also described what my client, whose name is Joe, he described what clothing he had on by color and his name, and he also described, I think, some clothing of the 2 other young men that was with him. But the most important information was that he said that Joe stores the crack in his ass. All right? Now, the officer and his partner drove to the location where this alleged illegal felony activity was supposed to be occurring. Well, when the officers get there, they look at these young men. There's no crack selling going on.
What are the young men doing?
They're just walking down the sidewalk, just talking. Walking lawfully down the sidewalk. They're not jaywalking. They're not in any way committing any type of crime that this officer can visibly see. But the officer says that he sees a cloud of blue smoke emanating from the young men. And the officer says in his training and experience, that smoke led him to believe, he had reason to believe that smoke was marijuana smoke. All right? So what the officer does then is that he then drives and approaches these young men, and he approaches them and he drives up to the sidewalk or whatever, and now he says he calls them over to the vehicle. All right? Now, for Fourth Amendment purposes, that is a seizure. The fact that the officer has now stopped you from going on your merry way is now a Fourth Amendment issue, because now the officer, which is law enforcement, has now seized you. Even though the seizure may be brief and temporary, the fact of the matter is he has stopped you from going on your merry way. You're not free to leave. The young men come over to the car, and the officer says at that point is when he smells. He says he smells marijuana. He says the scent of marijuana. He now smells it. So he has all 3 of them to put their hand on his car, Now, you know, the officer isn't interested in marijuana. We know what he wants.
Right.
He
Crack
wants,
in the crack.
He wants the crack in the crack. And he's got to figure out constitutionally a lawful manner in which to get to it. All right? And that's not going to be easy. In fact, it's really impossible.
It's impossible because he didn't see them committing
He
a crime.
didn't see them committing a crime. So what he does is he gets them, he pats them down, which of course is another Fourth Amendment issue, because now he's patted them down without any reason to believe that anybody is armed. So there is no safety concern for the officer. He never testified, gee, these guys look like they were loaded, had arms in them, so he shouldn't have even touched them, all right? So what he does then is he pats them down, finds nothing, anything of that nature, and he says then he gets Joe, and Joe apparently had on some type of pants that were elastic band. There was no belt. And he gets Joe, and he gets Joe's pants, and he pulls them from his waistline oh, I forgot. At this point, he's handcuffed them as well.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, he's handcuffed them, all right? These are all violations. These are just...
So they are arrested.
They're arrested. But the officer says...
With no probable cause.
With no probable cause. But the officer says in his testimony he was doing an investigation.
Oh, okay.
He's still perpetually investigating these sales of crack cocaine, right?
Okay.
So he pulls Joe's pants from his body, and he looks down at Joe's naked body. And his partner says, do you see anything? And he says, no, I don't see anything. So he turns Joe around and pulls his pants from the front. So now he's just looked at Joe's ass, and now he's looking at his genitalia, okay, from the front, okay?
That's awful.
So, and he doesn't see anything. So then what he decides to do, and this case just, at the time, I'm not as emotionally attached to it as I was now as I was then, but this was just awful. So then he decides that he's just going to put them all in the car. Oh, forgot. The officer says he does look around on the ground and he finds a small amount of still burning marijuana cigarette. Okay. He finds some burning marijuana, okay? So, but at the same time, in the testimony, the officer said he never saw anybody smoke it. He never saw anybody make any furtive moves throwing it down. He never saw them passing it. He just found some burnt marijuana on the ground, and he has no idea who it belongs to. As a matter of fact, he testified he never even attempted to attribute the care, custody, and control of it to anyone, all right? So then what the officer does is he puts them in the car, handcuffed, put them all in the back seat, and he starts driving somewhere.
Okay.
Okay? And so Joe asks him, hey, you know, where am I going? He said, shut up.
Oh,
You know, just shut up. Okay. You don't worry about where you're going. So they take them to a fire station. Some fire station, several miles away. Take them to the fire station. They get to the fire station, and they handcuff them all to a door. Yeah. They just handcuff them to a door. They get to and then they ask one of the fire attendants, he's just kind of walking around and says, hey, you have any gloves? And so Joe and his companions by now
Are freaking out.
are freaking out. What the heck is about to happen? He finds some gloves, okay? Now keep in mind, we don't know whether these gloves are sterile or not because they're just gloves. They're just somewhere in a box somewhere, all right? So we don't know what's on them, all right?
Or what they've been used
Or
for.
what
They
they've been
could have
used
been
for.
used to clean the oven at the fire station.
Right. So he finds the gloves, and you know who he's going to search first, right?
Joe.
Right. He gets Joe, unhooks him from the door handle. He has him, and he takes him to a location in the fire station that's not where his companions can see him, but somewhere where a fire truck is, and there's some table. And he tells Joe, and Joe is handcuffed, hands behind him, and he tells Joe, take your pants down. Joe's like, no, all right. And so what he does, and I'm gonna demonstrate this. What he does, he has Joe. What he does with Joe is handcuffed like this, okay?
Okay.
And he gets Joe, and he takes Joe, and he bends Joe over at the table like this, all right? And he kicks Joe's legs apart, all right? and he pulls Joe's pants down.
So
All right?
Joe's all the way bent
Joe is
over,
over the table, his pants are down, and
and his butt cheeks are open.
his butt cheeks are open. Okay. And this thing it gets hilarious. So then what he does is he then begins to first when he first looks at Joe, he doesn't see anything. So then, and of course the testimony of the officer is one thing, Joe's testimony is the other, right? The officer's testimony says, and I have it somewhere in here, but he says that, well, when I spread his butt cheeks, it was in plain view.
Oh, Lord.
He says when he spread his butt cheeks, all right? Joe's testimony is that, no, it was not in plain view. It was in there. Right? All right. It was in there, right? All right. It wasn't in plain view. Okay. We shouldn't be laughing at it. This is very serious. This is a very serious matter. Okay. But so Joe says that the officer took his hands, spread his butt open, exposed his anus, and dug around in there until he found it, and he pulled it out. Okay, he pulled it out. Okay, he pulled the crack out. Okay,
Crack out the crack.
Crack out of the crack. All right, and the officer then, after he finds that, he takes Joe back. All right, and he brings, each one of them one by one, and he does the exact same thing to all of them. All right? And one of the young men told the officer, listen, I don't have anything. Took him back there, went in there, found nothing in the other two individuals. All right? And what they did was they then, of course, now, Joe, the investigation, the officer testifies, it was a perpetual investigation. From the time they stopped him on the street until the time he pulled crack out of this guy's ass, he was doing what he called an investigatory detention. All right? That's how ridiculous this was. All right? So, after they get the crack out of Joe's anus, they then take the other two young men. One of them, they just take him off and just drop him back off where they picked them up. The other kid was, I think, even a little bit younger, and they just took him home to his parents. All right? Joe and the fella they dropped off at the street were two African-American young men. The other little fella was a Hispanic fella, their little friend. And I think he was, I think maybe he had some kind of curfew violation or something. I don't know what it was. But anyway, they just took him home, all right? And that's how this case arose. And if it's okay, I'd like to try to share with you. Well, let me just tell you this first. So what we did is I represented Joe. And in cases like that, it's not a guilt or innocence issue. The issue is the search. In other words, the crack, he was charged with possession of crack cocaine, which in fact he did possess. But the issue is, in this kind of case, it's not whether or not he's guilty or innocent. The issue is whether or not his constitutional rights were violated in the way that the officers went about obtaining the crack cocaine, all right? And so we went to court and we filed a motion to suppress, and we had a hearing and all of that, and I have some of the testimony here. And now I'm just giving you sort of the procedural, what happened. We filed the motion to suppress. We had a live hearing. The judge denied our motion to suppress and ruled that the officers, what they did was fine. We then appealed it to the 14th Court of Appeals, and the 14th Court of Appeals ruled in our favor. And what's interesting about this is the record won't show this. Well, I guess the Court of Appeals records will show that when the Court of Appeals ruled in our favor, they didn't really address all of the constitutional issues that I wanted addressed. I was trying to make a record of this thing because there were no cases throughout the land that had ever dealt with an issue like this. Most of the cavity search cases dealt with cavity searches either in a penal institution, which of course there's a lower expectation of privacy in the penal institution, border crossing, which there's a lower expectation in border crossing, and it's one other one besides border crossing.
Was it airport? Was another one with the airport?
No, no, it's not the airports. It's border crossings. See, I can just look at the way I framed my issues. Let's see here.
Well, it doesn't.
Border crossing, penal institution, hospital, police station house, or a jail facility. In other words, those areas, there were cases that dealt with cavity searches in those kind of issues. But no cavity searches issues had ever been dealt with dealing with the police encountering someone
On the street.
out on the streets, and they're conducting, whether it's visual, whether it's anal probing, cavity searches, or whatever. Or even just strip searches, period. Just an officer performing any kind of search like that out on the scene. That hadn't been dealt with before. So the Court of Appeals initially ruled in my favor, and I wasn't satisfied. I'm very aggressive. So I filed a rehearing because I want them to not only rule in my favor, but I want them to rule and address in particular the issues that I raised. And you know what? They rewrote an opinion and addressed my issues and still ruled in my favor.
And make sure the viewers understand what they ruled in your favor. Did they say that the Fourth Amendment was violated to the federal Constitution and our state right to unreasonable searches and seizures? Kind of explain what the constitutional rights that were violated.
Okay. The Court of Appeals ruled that the search was Fourth Amendment constitutionally unreasonable, right?
And which search was it? The actual anal search or the actual seizure on the street? What part was actually?
It was the cavity, the anal cavity in the police station, looking at his anus, going up in there. They said that was just unreasonable. It wasn't safe. It wasn't sanitary. There was no exigent circumstances, which was a very important issue that I wanted them to address because they could have easily.
Right, and that means no emergency. There was no emergency that would require a police officer to stick his finger up someone's butt.
Correct. They could have easily gotten a warrant if they felt it was there. And so
they could have detained the young man and gotten a warrant and then taken him to a medical facility where the proper safety, because his anus could have been torn. In fact, something bad happened to one of these kids in the butt. Because basically, you've been sexually assaulted by a man.
Correctly.
That's taking, especially the other two young men who didn't have any crack in their butt. So, I mean, who let someone go up their butt?
Right.
A medical facility would use sanitary gloves.
Absolutely.
They would also use a lubricant so that you at least can feel like it really didn't happen afterwards, after the lubricant wears off, but to just forcefully put your finger up somebody's butt. And one of the children was a juvenile.
Right. But two were juveniles.
Juvenile. That means that for criminal purposes, they were 16 or under.
Correct. All right. So they ruled in our favor. The state appealed to the Court of Criminal Appeals. All right. And then the Court of Criminal Appeals granted them a petition for discretionary review. And the Court of Criminal Appeals ruled against me. All right. And of course, I filed a motion for rehearing. And what was interesting is every step of the way, each court recognized this is a case of first impression. We have no authorities on this issue. All right, so it hadn't been addressed. So there was no precedent. So they were pulling from. Go ahead.
But I thought that there was some precedent in the federal system. I thought the federal courts had even said that you could not do cavity searches unless there were certain safeguards performed, like medical personnel.
Well, the only issue where the cavity searches had come up was those that I just named.
Okay.
It was always in the penal institutions, but there was never this out on the street cop doing this to people. So it was first impression all the way through. The Supreme Court hadn't even addressed it. Even all of the circuits, they had never addressed it like this because it had never happened. Usually it might be an issue where someone's at the police station or someone's crossing the border and they do it and all this kind of stuff, but never. I think it was one case where it was in a penal institution and it was, I think the penal institution had a policy that visitors coming to see inmates in the penal institution sometimes had to endure that, and they allowed that to be okay because because people coming in prisons be hiding stuff to give to the inmates, and so which means that if you know that, I guess I guess the rationale is that, well, if you're going to visit someone, we're telling you that's what we do here. We're letting you know you have a choice in to say, hey, you know what, I don't need to see them that bad. And you just have to endure that. But the bottom line is that this particular issue in the federal system, there were no cases on it.
Wow.
Yeah, it didn't exist. And so when, after the Court of Criminal Appeals ruled in favor of the state, then I appealed it to the U.S. Supreme Court. I asked for a writ of certiorari, right? And as a matter of fact, this is the actual booklet, the writ to the United States Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court just basically denied cert. They didn't address the issue at all. They didn't address it. They didn't say why they denied. They didn't have, of course they don't have to say it, but they didn't give any reason at all. They just didn't touch it.
And do you think that they were right or wrong in doing that?
Oh, of course, I think this was a bad Texas precedence. Very, very bad.
So it's basically saying that if a police officer wants to go and snatch someone off the street because they got anonymous information that is not verified, relied upon, or that the crime or suspected crime did not occur in their vision, that they could take a person, even a juvenile, and go and look up their butts and tear their butts up. In fact, in this case, didn't one of the juveniles' mother tell you that he had feces in his underwear?
Right.
They had damaged his butt such that he couldn't hold his bowels?
Right. As a matter of fact, let me read the testimony of one of the young men's mothers. I said, this is the question. Okay, now with respect to December 20th, 1997, did you notice something unusual with respect to your son after he came home that day? Answer, yes. Question, and what did you notice? Answer, Damien was in the restroom. He came out and I went in. Question, and why did you go in the restroom? Answer, cause he had come home and he told me the police officer had searched him and went up in his rectum. Question, okay, and after you were in the restroom, did you discover any evidence of that? Answer, yes. Question, what did you discover? Answer, Damien underwears was in the trash can and I picked them up. Question, and what was in the underwear? Answer, it was some stool in the underwear. Question, had you ever known Damien to, since he's been an adult or not a baby, to, and before I could finish that question, she says, not at all. I said, to use the restroom on himself. And she says, no, not at all.
That's just awful.
Oh, that's horrible.
That's just awful. Clarence, sitting here listening to that, what do you think about this? You watch court cases all the time, and you used to be a journalist. I know you're still a journalist, but I know you used to write for the Post. What do you think about this, what Kevin Howard has gone over with us?
It appears that just when you think you've heard most of the horror stories, there always come another one that you never heard about, Yeah. And this is one classic example. Okay.
Clarence, how long have you been watching cases in court?
When I first started as a freelance writer in 1983, and up until 1995, where then I took a little break and I come back a few years later.
Okay, so you've been down there almost 30 years, and you've never heard of a case like this?
No, never. Like I stated before, I've come across some of the most bizarre murder cases, police brutality, rapes, and assaults, and this one, like I say, this one is just a case where, just when you think you've heard them all, there ain't nothing else you can tell me that I ain't never heard before. Okay, well, this is another one I have to add to my horror list. Okay, yeah, this is another one.
So, do you think the police were justified in what they did?
Since he broke down the elements of the law and explained, that only way that a person's body can be probed, like the police did in his case, it has to be done in a penal institution, prison, jail, crossing the border. Well, now I understand that this is not supposed to be done by police officers on the streets of Houston. And so this is something that is foreign to me, because people have told me on more than one occasion that police had searched their cavities, and I thought it was all legal, okay? But until now.
And why did you think it was legal?
Because I had seen so much down it through years at the Harris County Criminal Courthouse where where the attorney would file a motion where they feel police had violated the Fourth Amendment, and the judges usually always upheld the prosecution, upheld the prosecution standpoint that the search was legal.
Do you think that if the kids were not black and Hispanic kids, but white kids, it would be legal?
Well, that's kind of a catch-22 type of call. It's kind of difficult to say what a police officer would do with this group, or what he might do with this particular person from this another ethnicity or whatever. But it's clear to me that most of the times I hear these horror stories like this one. Well, bad police searches, brutality, particularly illegal search and seizure. Usually it's going to be young blacks, Hispanics, or if it's a white person, it's usually going to be some white person that's usually maybe the one that's on the lower economic level, the one that's hang around in black neighborhoods, and somebody that's poor white, as we call them, and some well-up-to-do person from, that's with status. You usually don't hear that happening to them.
How would you feel if it happened to you? If somebody went up your butt with some gloves at a fire station, just snatched you up off the street, because maybe you're talking to a guy that's a drug dealer on the street, that's your friend. How would you feel about that? Would you feel that's legal?
No, it wouldn't be legal, and I would be horrified. And to be truthful, now that I know the truth about the different searches in terms of the body, well then, at this point, I would object. I don't care how angry the officer may be. I would object to it. I mean, call the sergeant out here, because somebody is breaking the law. Well, first of all, now that I've learned about how the legal system works, and having worked with lawyers, interviewed with lawyers, first, I call your sergeant, and plus I'm calling my lawyer.
Well, also, don't you think that you should, afterwards, you should make an IAD complaint, an internal affairs complaint? Because it's not legal for police officers to do this. And usually they deny it, just like in the trial that you watched, when
Right.
the homeless guy that was at the apartment or at the house where the search warrant occurred, he got up there and cried, and you knew it was sincere tears.
Yes, it
that
was.
he was violated.
Yes, it
but yet
was.
the officer denied happening because he knows that's against their general orders. It's not a part of police procedure.
Right. And some people, and again, you make a good point. People should be made aware that police is prohibited from doing body surgery, probing someone's rectum or vagina on the streets. And some people it has happened to, they just pretty much, looked at it as just doing police procedures, because they're not aware of their rights in that regard. And then
Right.
sometimes police intimidate people.
Right. Right. Well, one of the things we want to do in this show is explain what your rights are as citizens, and by no means are we condoning drug selling or drug trafficking. We all live in Houston. We care about our community, and we want it to be safe and drug-free. But we also want there to be honest police officers that follow police procedure. The police department does not have a procedure in which they legally allow or have a general order where they allow police officers to go up a person's cavity. I mean, what's going to happen if you tear somebody's butt? Like in this little kid's case, who knows if his anus was ever repaired? I mean, he had to throw his underwear away because he had feces in his underwear. I mean, how would you ever know? So it's just very unusual. let's go back to Kevin Howard. Yes, please.
A couple of things. Let me go into some of the rationale of the Court of Criminal Appeals and the import of these decisions is to make people understand how important it is to vote, because these judges on these appellate courts are voted into office, and when you don't participate in the process and by voting, you can end up getting judges who will always be voting against your interest. Always. There's just no doubt about it. For instance, all right, this is the rationale that the Court of Criminal Appeals, in order to rule against us on this is what they were saying. They said, although the search may have been an uncomfortable experience for a petitioner,
All right.
such uncomfortableness was not sufficient to classify the search as violent.
Oh, wow.
So this is how the Court of Criminal Appeals, they can just make blanket statements that make absolutely no sense. They said, although Officer Rowan had no formal training, his work experience qualified him to perform the search. It's just blanket stuff. That's how they ruled against him.
Right, but he would want
There's no law.
He would want a man to go up his butt
Right.
with no training, not a medical doctor, and think that's okay.
It said, based on the totality of the circumstances, Officer Rowan had sufficient justification to believe that the cavity search was necessary. Right?
All right.
Then they go on and says, although the fire station, everything was although the fire station where the search was conducted was not as sterile environment as a hospital, on the whole, the place where the search was conducted was reasonable, and a less sterile environment was satisfactory. Although petitioner was not taken to a separate room at the fire station, but rather to a separate location, such separate location was sufficient to protect the privacy interest of the petitioner. All right.
Let's cut away for a call real quickly.
Sure, go ahead.
Caller, you're on.
I have a question. My brother got arrested. May I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am, you can ask a question.
Okay. What happened was that my brother said that he was driving. He and his girlfriend was going to, I guess it was a hotel, a motel, off of 59, and they pulled into the hotel, and they were already in the room. And then evidently the officer knocked on the door and said that his license plate light was out, and asked my brother to step outside. And then when he asked him for his ID, he gave him his ID, but his driver's license had been suspended. So at that time, he arrested him and searched his car and found a gun in it. And so now he has carrying a weapon. And I just didn't think that they could do that because he was already in his room. Was that okay?
That's an interesting question, and we'll just take it as a hypothetical since you don't know really everything that happened. But based on what you said, did your brother indicate whether or not the officer actually saw him driving?
The officer told him he saw him driving, but because the traffic was so fast or something, that he couldn't get over to pull him over at that time. But also what happened was that when my brother got arrested, because it was in a rental car, the people from the rental car place came to pick the car on a tow truck, and when they got there, they said the license plate light was actually working. It was fine. And they ended up giving the rental car back to my brother, found it out of jail the next day.
Wow. That's a good case. Your brother should fight that case because it sounds like an unreasonable search and seizure, exactly what Attorney Kevin Howard has been talking about tonight. That's when your rights have been violated. The officer did not have sufficient probable cause. Well, he should have been pulling him over, but I think it's gone too far to go up in to follow someone up into a room to talk about a light, because it's not even a safety issue at that point. Your brother knocking on the door is an issue. I mean, answering the door, because he had a right not to answer that door. But a lot of times when police are at the door, people feel like they do have to answer. And even his license being suspended, there's an issue of really whether he saw him driving, because he didn't really pull him over while he was driving. So I'm not even sure if the officer actually saw who was driving. It could have been the girlfriend driving. But I'll let Kevin Howard speak to those issues also.
Okay. One of my issues is, of course, the whole thing sounds fishy, but we need to talk specifically about how do the officers have any particular justification to get to the vehicle. I don't think that the officer had any grounds to search the vehicle, even if everything was true, even if he's had a bad headlight, even if his license was experienced, even if he did open your brother opened the door and let him out. If the car, first of all, now that the car is parked, it's no longer in, it's not in traffic, it's not impeding traffic, it's not in any way involved in anything that the officer would have a reason to now address his attention to what's inside the car. There's no reason for that now. He's got his man is going to arrest, and apparently, if there were other people there as well, so now the whole justification for having a reason to want to, let's say, seize the vehicle, all of that disappears, because now that someone's there at the scene who can also take possession of the car, and the car isn't even in harm's way in the first place.
Right.
The officer had no reason to be searching the car. That's the way I see it. But
I totally agree. He shouldn't search the car at all.
Shouldn't have searched the car at all.
What's your thoughts, Clarence?
Okay. Now, I've been told by a police officer that I interviewed personally is that they say the reason why they search these vehicles if they're going to take someone to jail, and that is to do what you call an inventory search.
Correct. Absolutely.
But that's only if the car is going to be towed from a street.
Right.
This car is safely parked at a motel where this guy is lawfully at. So it's no problem with the car being there. So there's no reason to do an inventory search of a car that is lawfully parked. If you're stopping someone on the street, you can't just leave a car on the street. So a tow truck is going to take it. Right. And then there's a policy to inventory the car so that the record driver is not responsible for what's stolen if something's ever stolen out of the car. That's supposed to be what the purpose of it is. There's no inventory there.
Right. There's no
Any other questions about that caller? Thanks for calling.
Okay, well, I'll make sure I explain it to my brother, and I just really appreciate the show. You guys do a good job.
Thank you so much, caller, and please watch us next Wednesday at 6:30. Thank you. So what other thoughts did you have about that, Clarence?
Well, none at this point, because now you say that the vehicle was parked and it was in a safe place and it was not impeding traffic or nor blocking some
We got one other call. Let me take this. Let me break away for a moment. Caller, you're on. Caller, you're on. Can you hear me?
Hi, can you tell me if I'm hearing correctly? Yes, I can.
And turn your TV down so we can hear you better. Thank you.
Okay, am I hearing you guys correctly to say that if an officer stops a person and their vehicle is safely parked in a parking lot or at a location where another person can take possession of the vehicle, it does not necessarily have to be towed, and the officer, especially if the occupant has left the vehicle, it does not necessarily have to be?
No, it shouldn't be. It actually shouldn't be. The tow policy was intended for the citizen's benefit, the citizen that's being arrested's benefit. We're towing the car so that you know where your car is when you get out of jail, and so that it's not destroyed because we caused you to leave your car. So the purpose is not just to tow so you can search. The problem is things have morphed into we really want to search it, and we're saying it's because of the inventory. We're inventorying it because we have to. So if a car is lawfully parked, like in someone's driveway or in a parking lot, no, they do not. It should not be towed. If it's safely where it should not be towed. And they can give it to another person. HPD has general orders that specifically speak about the option that the citizen being arrested has. And a lot of lawyers don't check that. But
and another thing is that when that situation arises, the officer does not have to give the person who's being stopped, the officer doesn't have to allow them to call someone to come and get the car. In other words, the officer doesn't have to allow the person to say, let me call my mother, let me call my brother to come pick up the car. No, the officer doesn't have to do that. But the officer cannot ignore if there is a reasonable alternative to towing that car. And reasonable is normally means that someone's right there who's lawfully licensed, right there. There's no other impediments for them turning, and that person who's getting arrested says, hey, you know, my brother's right here. He's got a license. He can take the car.
Right.
If that alternative is there, it is reasonable, and the brother who's about to get the car isn't drunk or is in some other kind of way infirm, then the officer cannot just ignore that and then just say, you know what, I just want to tow it anyway. That's constitutionally impermissible.
That's wrong, and it happens a lot, but remember, it's more toward the street. One of the things I noticed that the police do a lot is tow cars from driveways. When they follow people home and it's in a driveway, it's safe, that's where they can just leave the keys there, or leave the keys with another person, because it doesn't have to be driven anymore.
Right.
So that's one of the things that lawyers should fight and object to. You have another question, caller?
I do not. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your call, and please watch us next Wednesday at 6:30. All right, that's good. So do you have anything else? We have about 7 minutes. We want to tell us at least about 5 minutes more if you can, and then we'll try to do some lessons we've learned, conclusions.
All right.
Oh, we have one more call.
Okay, we have another call. Let's go.
Caller, you're on.
Hello?
Caller, you're on. Thank you. Tell us your question.
How you doing? I'm sitting here listening to your program,
Yes, sir.
and I have a question for you. My son was stopped, I believe it was last year, in about June, July. He and his girlfriend was at a park in Sugar Land, and two officers pulled up and told him to get out the car and everything like that, and saw that he was smoking. But my son smokes, but he smokes those cigarettes that you roll yourself.
Yes, sir.
And he said that he and his girlfriend said, the officer said, I got you now. My son said, what you talking about? He said, you out here in the park smoking marijuana. My son said, this is the bugle, the package is right here in my car. So he saw that and smelled it and said, you got away with one. But the cop also started harassing him and, just doing him bad and handcuffed him and and stuff like that.
Right. That's unfortunate.
And the officer also cut his, what you call the phone on his car.
Uh-huh.
Not the phone, but the camera. Cut the camera off in his car and just started berating my son and stuff like that. And it upset my son and his girlfriend so much. My son, he was crying and stuff like that. He's 25 years old. That's how bad it was.
Well, that's awful, and your son, I'm sure, works, and he's a taxpayer, and he should file a complaint against that police officer.
He did. He filed a complaint with Sugar Land. Filed a complaint with the Sugar Land Police Department.
That's good.
And he got a letter from the police department saying that the officer was in the wrong. He would be disciplined. Is that a case for police brutality?
No, because he wasn't physically harmed; he was humiliated, and it appears that the police department did the right thing.
I'm not gonna say he was physically harmed, but they handcuffed him. They put the handcuffs on him, and they put him on so tight it bruised his wrist and stuff.
Okay, Kevin, what do you think about that?
Well, technically, that could possibly be, in other words, your son did suffer an injury, but number one, no lawyer in his right mind would take it because the injury isn't sufficient enough for there is no money in the case. Secondly, when you try to sue someone civilly for police misconduct, the loops and hurdles you have to go through to try to initially just to even get the case in the court without getting a summary judgment assessed against you. You have to be able to prove that whatever the police agency is, you have to be able to prove that there is a policy, a practice that particular officer was following. That in other words, it's the action of the city that actually did this to your son, even though they did it through this particular officer.
And let me add this because we have to go through.
Okay,
we have to
proven
kind
pattern
of,
of practice is very, very difficult.
we
Very
have
difficult.
to kind of wrap this up, but police officers have immunity for being sued generally. That's the problem. So what they're doing under color of law, they're immune from suing like you would sue me for hurting your son. So that becomes a problem. So it has to be such an egregious pattern that the police department is following that hurts people. And as we know, handcuffing for their safety is a good policy that they have. Unfortunately, it seems that this officer had the handcuffs too tight. So the problem is, yes, you could sue him, but he wouldn't get any money for it. That's basically the bottom line.
Right.
And thank you for calling. And do you enjoy the show so far?
Yes, I watch it every Wednesday.
I appreciate that. We'll be here next Wednesday. We're going to continue talking about cavity searches and other situations that occur when a person is stopped so that you'll know your rights. Thank you for calling, and ask other people to call in. All right, so Kevin, we have 2 minutes. So unfortunately, you can't go into as much as you wanted to, but can you kind of give us a 1-minute summary about this? And then, Clarence, you'll be ready to tell us if there's anything you want to say.
Well, it's okay. You
Well,
first.
go ahead and summarize.
Okay. Basically, I hope people understand that these things are happening out there. In my opinion, the most important way to deal with this is to make sure that you vote so you can get the appropriate judges in the courts, so that when these issues are at least brought before the court, a lot of it's going to always go on, and we won't be able to stop all of it. But however, at least if you try to get people in positions of authority, and that could be from mayors on down, judges and on down, if you get the appropriate people in the positions, then when these issues arise, they can be addressed appropriately. And especially if they end up going through the court system, you at least know that you'll probably have a fair hearing of your particular grievance.
And let me just wrap this up also. Thank you, callers and viewers, for watching Truth and Justice with Vivian King. Every week, I want to bring to you real cases that are going on in the criminal courthouse here in Houston, in Harris County, that people don't talk about. Things that affect people in the system. Try to answer some of your questions so that we can be a more educated society. So that when we vote, like when we go and vote in 2012, we understand we're voting for more than just the president. We're voting for judges. There will be about 50 judges up for election that you don't even know about. And we need our voices to be heard, and we need to make sure that we have good police officers that are doing what we want them to do, following the law and not violating people's rights and not raping people. We will continue this next week when we talk about more cavity searches and more illegal stops next Wednesday at 6:30 on your local Comcast station, UVerse station, and on the World Wide Web. Thank you so much for joining us. Clarence, again, thank you for watching the courts.
Yes,
thank you
my
for telling
pleasure.
us about what you see in the courthouse. I hope to have you on.
I have many stories. I have many good, interesting stories that could make this show run from now to 2020.
And Kevin Howard, thank you so much. Kevin's a local lawyer here, and hopefully you'll come back and join us and tell us some more good stories.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week at 6:30. Thank you. This is Vivian King. Bye-bye.